Jake Morrison stepped off the transport shuttle and immediately knew he was in trouble. Not because of the ominous red glow emanating from asteroid Prometheus 7, or the fact that the place looked like someone had carved a military base out of a particularly angry piece of space rock. No. Jake knew he was in trouble because every single alien within a 50-meter radius had suddenly gone quiet and I was staring at him like he'd just announced his intention to juggle antimatter. "Oh great," Jake muttered, adjusting his regulation pack, the welcoming committee. The Galactic Military Academy's Crucible Campus had a reputation that preceded it across 17 star systems. This was where the galaxy's toughest warriors came to either become legends or become cautionary tales. The mortality rate was allegedly only 12%, but Jake suspected that was because they stopped counting after the first few digits. Cadet Morrison. The voice cracked like a whip across the landing bay. Jake turned to see Commander Vex'tal approaching, all four arms swinging in perfect military precision. The Zentorian's blue-scaled face bore the expression of someone who'd just discovered their dinner was still moving. "You're late." "Traffic was murder," Jake replied with a grin. Apparently there was a solar flare that knocked out the hyperspace lanes, and "I do not care about your excuses, Deathworlder." Vex'tal's voice could have frozen plasma. "You are here because some bureaucrat in the Terran embassy thought it would be amusing to see how long a human lasts in our program. I give you 3 days before you either quit or require medical evacuation." Jake's grin widened. "I'll take that bet." The other cadets were still staring. Jake could see representatives from at least a dozen species, all of whom looked like they could bench press a shuttle. There was a Krillian whose chitinous armor probably cost more than Jake's entire planet's GDP. A Vorvak whose tentacles kept twitching like they were calculating the best way to strangle someone. And what appeared to be a walking tree that was somehow giving off an aura of barely contained violence. "Your bunkmate is waiting in dormitory block C," Vex'tal continued, consulting a tablet with 2 of his hands while the other 2 remained clasped behind his back. "Try not to contaminate him with your species' tendency toward chaos." The walk to the dormitory was an adventure in itself. Every corridor seemed designed to test whether you deserved to be there. Jake passed training rooms where cadets were doing exercises that would have been considered torture on most civilized worlds, and he could hear the distant sounds of combat that suggested someone was either sparring or being murdered very enthusiastically. Dormitory Block C turned out to be a long hallway lined with doors that looked like they belonged on a prison ship. Jake found his assigned room and palmed the scanner. The door slid open to reveal what could charitably be described as a living space, if you were the kind of person who considered a supply closet luxurious. "Oh no," said a voice that sounded like someone gargling honey. "Oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no." Jake's bunkmate was currently occupying the corner of the room in what appeared to be a state of gelatinous panic. Kriex was a blobarian, which meant he looked like someone had crossed a jellyfish with anxiety itself and given it the ability to speak. His translucent blue form was vibrating at a frequency that suggested imminent molecular collapse. "You must be Kriex," Jake said, dropping his pack on the unclaimed bunk. "I'm Jake." "You're the human," Kriex replied, his voice climbing several octaves. "They said you'd be coming. They said you'd probably kill us all by accident within the first week." "That seems a little harsh," Jake said, sitting down on his bunk. "I've been alive for 22 years and I've only accidentally killed. Well, okay, there was that incident with the hydroponics bay, but that was mostly the fault of whoever designed a system that couldn't handle a little improvisation." Krieks's vibration intensified. "Improvisation? What kind of improvisation?" "Nothing major. I just thought the nutrient flow could be optimized with a few modifications." "How was I supposed to know that crossing the plasma feeds would cause a chain reaction that would sterilize 3 decks? "Oh stars preserve us," Kriex moaned, somehow managing to look even more transparent. "I'm going to die. I'm going to die because my bunkmate is a Deathworlder who thinks a little improvisation is an acceptable approach to engineering." "Hey, it worked out fine in the end," Jake protested. "We got better crops the next season." "Better crops? What happened to the original crops?" "Well, they sort of mutated. But the new ones were 20% more nutritious and they glowed, which was actually pretty cool. The medical bay said the mild radiation poisoning was completely treatable." Creerix had gone completely transparent except for his eyes, which were now the size of dinner plates. I need to request a transfer. I need to request a transfer to a different galaxy. Jake couldn't help but laugh. Come on, Creerix, it's going to be fine. What's the worst that could happen? The question hung in the air like a challenge to the universe itself. Somewhere in the distance, an alarm began to wail, and Jake could hear the sound of running feet in the corridor outside. Creerix made a sound like a deflating balloon and began to sink into his corner. Why? Creerix whispered. Why did I have to ask for advanced placement? The next morning brought Jake's first real taste of what the Crucible Campus considered education. Breakfast was served in a massive hall that looked like it had been designed by someone who thought intimidation was a food group. The ceiling stretched up into shadow, and the walls were covered with holographic displays showing the Academy's most distinguished graduates. Most of them, Jake noticed, had died in spectacularly heroic ways. That's General Corvan, said a voice behind him. Jake turned to see a cadre of upperclassmen who'd apparently decided he needed an orientation. The speaker was a Thrakari whose scales had the kind of shine that suggested he spent more time on maintenance than most people spent sleeping. He graduated here 200 years ago, held off an entire pirate fleet single-handedly. Impressive, Jake said, balancing his tray of what the food service optimistically called breakfast. What happened to him? Choked on a fishbone at his retirement party. Jake blinked. Seriously, the galaxy has a sense of humor, the Thrakari continued, but that's nothing compared to the legend of Tartarus. The way he said it made Jake think of thunder and dramatic music. Tartarus? Let me guess, another dead hero. Tartarus, said another cadet, a Vorvac whose tentacles were twitching with excitement, is the Academy's ultimate training simulation. It's an escape room designed to test every aspect of military thinking, physical prowess, tactical analysis, psychological endurance, and pure determination. Okay, Jake said, sitting down at a table that looked like it was made from a single piece of meteorite. What makes it so special? The record time, whispered a third cadet. A Zentorian whose forearms were gesturing dramatically is 28 minutes and 43 seconds. Set by Commander Vex'tal, the greatest warrior in Krillian history. And he died of exhaustion 17 minutes after completing it. Jake paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. He died from finishing an escape room. Tartarus isn't just an escape room. The Thrakari explained. It's a test of everything that makes a warrior. The average completion time is 6 hours. Most cadets take 3 attempts. Some never finish at all. The room adapts, added the Vorvac. It learns from each attempt, becoming more challenging based on the individual strengths and weaknesses. It's said to be impossible to complete in under 30 minutes. Unless you're willing to die trying, the Zentorian concluded. Jake looked around the table. Every cadet was nodding solemnly, like they were discussing a religious experience. Right. And this is part of the curriculum. It's the final exam for advanced tactical training, the Thrakari said. Only the best of the best even attempt it, or the desperate, added the Vorvac, or the insane, finished the Zentorian. Jake was beginning to understand why Creerix had been vibrating at quantum frequencies all morning. His bunkmate had been unusually quiet during breakfast, which for a Blobberian was like saying a star had been unusually bright. The thing is, Jake said slowly, it's just an escape room, right? I mean, how hard can it be? The silence that followed was so complete that Jake could hear the distant hum of the asteroid's life support systems. Every cadet within earshot had turned to stare at him with expressions ranging from horror to fascination. Hard, the Thrakari repeated. Cadet Morrison, Tartarus has broken warriors who've conquered entire star systems. But it's still just a room with puzzles, Jake insisted. I mean, I've done escape rooms before. There was this one back on Earth where you had to solve a murder mystery while being chased by actors dressed as zombies. Took me about 20 minutes. Actors dressed as zombies. The Vorvac's tentacles had gone completely still. What is an actor? Someone who pretends to be something they're not for entertainment. And a zombie? A reanimated corpse that wants to eat your brains. The Zentorian's 4 hands were now covering his face. Your species does this for fun. Well, yeah. It's called entertainment. No wonder you're classified as Deathworlders. the Thrakari muttered. Before Jake could respond, the conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Commander Vex'tal, whose forearms were moving in a pattern that suggested barely controlled aggression. "Cadet Morrison," Vex'tal announced, his voice carrying across the dining hall like a judicial sentence. "Report to Training Base 7 immediately." Jake stood up, noting that his breakfast companions were suddenly very interested in their food. "What's in Training Base 7? Vex'tal's smile was the kind that predators used right before they explained the food chain. "Your final exam. But I just got here yesterday. You stated that you found our training inadequate for someone of your experience." Vex'tal's voice dripped with disdain. "Therefore, we shall test that experience immediately." Jake could feel every eye in the dining hall focused on him. The Kriex, who had managed to achieve a state of near invisibility, was making sounds like a deflating balloon. "Tartarus?" Jake asked. "Tartarus," Vex'tal confirmed. "Complete it in under 30 minutes, and you'll be fast-tracked to advanced training. And you'll be shipped back to Earth with a note explaining that humans are not ready for civilized warfare." The challenge hung in the air like a gauntlet. Jake could feel the weight of expectation, the assumption that he would fail spectacularly and provide entertainment for the next semester. "Sounds fair," Jake said. "When do I start?" "No." Now, Training Base 7 looked like someone had taken a warehouse and decided it needed more ominous lighting. The walls were lined with monitoring equipment that beeped and blinked in patterns that suggested they were measuring things Jake probably didn't want to know about. In the center of the room stood a door that looked like it belonged on a bank vault, assuming the bank was expecting to be robbed by people with access to military-grade explosives. "Behold," Commander Vex'tal announced with the kind of dramatic flair that suggested he'd been practicing, "Tartarus." Jake walked around the door, noting that it was at least 3 meters tall and appeared to be made from some kind of metal that was definitely not found on Earth. "Looks like a door." "Behind that door," Vex'tal continued, "lies a series of challenges designed to test every aspect of your military capability, your physical strength, tactical thinking, psychological endurance, and the ability to adapt under pressure." "Right," Jake said. "Any rules? Survive. Complete the course. Try not to die. Those are some pretty flexible guidelines." Vex'tal's forearms crossed in a pattern that suggested disapproval. "The room will monitor your progress. If you require medical attention, use the emergency beacon. If you surrender, use the emergency beacon. If you realize that humans are not cut out for military service, use the emergency beacon." "Got it." Emergency beacon for everything. The timer begins when you enter the room. The record to beat is 28 minutes and 43 seconds. Jake looked at the assembled crowd of instructors and cadets who had gathered to watch his inevitable failure. Kriex was vibrating at a frequency that was making nearby equipment malfunction. "Any last words of wisdom?" Jake asked. "Yes," Vex'tal replied. "Try not to embarrass your species more than necessary." The door slid open with a sound like a tomb being unsealed. Jake peered into the darkness beyond and saw what appeared to be a corridor that stretched into infinity. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows on walls that seemed to shift and move when he wasn't looking directly at them. "Cheerful," Jake muttered, and stepped inside. The door slammed shut behind him with a finality that suggested it had had personal opinions about his chances of success. Jake found himself in a corridor that was definitely bigger on the inside than it had appeared from outside, which was either very advanced technology or a violation of several laws of physics. "Welcome, Cadet Morrison," said a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "I am the Tartarus Protocol. You have entered the galaxy's most advanced training simulation. You will face 7 challenges designed to test your worthiness as a military officer. Good luck." "Emcone?" "Thanks," Jake said. "I'll try not to break anything. Breaking things will result in penalty points and possible." Yeah. Emergency beacon." "I got it." The first challenge appeared as the corridor opened into a vast chamber filled with what Jake generously assumed were obstacles. There were platforms suspended at various heights, connected by bridges that looked like they'd been designed by someone who thought safety rails were for weaklings. In the center of the chamber hung a glowing orb that pulsed with the kind of light that suggested it was important. "Objective," the Tartarus Protocol announced, "retrieve the beacon of courage without falling into the pit of despair." Jake looked down. The pit was definitely there, and it was definitely deep enough to earn its name. He could see previous cadets' approaches carved into the walls where they'd apparently tried to climb their way to the beacon using a combination of skill and determination. Right, Jake said. Beacon of courage, got it. He walked to the edge of the pit and studied the obstacle course. The platforms were arranged in a complex pattern that would require careful timing and athletic ability to navigate. The bridges swayed ominously, and Jake could see pressure plates that would probably trigger some kind of unpleasant surprise if stepped on incorrectly. Or, Jake said to himself, I could just do this. He pulled out his standard-issue emergency grappling hook, aimed it at the beacon, and fired. The hook clamped onto the orb with a satisfying click, and Jake rappelled down to grab it directly. Objective complete. The Tartarus protocol said, sounding confused. Time elapsed, 47 seconds. Sweet, Jake said, clipping the beacon to his belt. What's next? The next challenge was apparently a logic puzzle that involved arranging a series of crystalline structures in a pattern that would unlock the next area. The crystals were arranged on a massive board that looked like it had been designed by someone who thought chess was for beginners. Objective, the protocol announced, solve the puzzle of infinite complexity using advanced tactical analysis. Jake looked at the board. The crystals were definitely pretty, and they seemed to be arranged in some kind of pattern. There were symbols carved into the board that looked like they meant something important, and Jake could see where previous cadets had spent considerable time trying to work out the correct sequence. Infinite complexity, Jake mused. Right. He walked to the center of the board and began moving crystals at random, following the simple principle that if something was called a puzzle, it probably had a solution, and if it had a solution, there was probably a shortcut. After about 30 seconds of random rearrangement, something clicked. The crystals began to glow, and a door opened in the far wall. Objective complete, the protocol said, sounding even more confused. Time elapsed, 1 minute, 12 seconds. Here, Jake said. That was easier than I thought. In the monitoring room, Commander Vex'tal was staring at the displays with the kind of expression usually reserved for people who'd just discovered their entire understanding of reality was wrong. How, he said slowly, did he solve the puzzle of infinite complexity by arranging the crystals randomly? Sir, said one of the technicians, I think he accidentally arranged them in the pattern of a human constellation called the Big Dipper. The puzzle was programmed to accept any configuration that represented stellar navigation. But we never anticipated someone would use their homeworld's primitive astronomy. He solved it by accident? He solved it by being human, sir. The third challenge was apparently designed to test psychological endurance. Jake found himself in a room that looked like a cross between a meditation chamber and a torture device. The walls were covered with screens showing images that were clearly designed to be disturbing, while speakers filled the air with sounds that would have made a banshee consider therapy. Objective, the protocol announced, maintain psychological stability while experiencing the trials of mental fortitude. Jake looked around the room and shrugged. Okay, but I should probably warn you that I grew up with 3 younger sisters and spent most of my teenage years working in customer service. He sat down in the center of the room and waited. The images on the screen cycled through what Jake assumed were the galaxy's most terrifying concepts. There were things with too many teeth, things with too many eyes, and things that apparently had strong opinions about the proper arrangement of tentacles. Is this supposed to be scary? Jake asked after a few minutes. Because I once had to explain to a customer why their warranty didn't cover damage caused by their pet's digestive system. That was way more traumatic than this. The sounds grew louder and more discordant. Jake recognized some of them as the kinds of noises that were designed to trigger primal fear responses. Unfortunately for the simulation, human primal fear responses had been calibrated by millions of years of evolution on a planet where everything was actively trying to kill everything else. Look, Jake said, I appreciate the effort, but I once sat through a 4-hour presentation on quarterly sales projections. This is actually kind of relaxing. The screens flickered and went dark. The sounds stopped. Objective complete, the protocol said, and Jake could swear he heard resignation in its voice. Time elapsed, 3 minutes, 27 seconds. Great, Jake said, standing up. What's next? The fourth challenge was apparently designed to test his ability to work under pressure. Jake found himself in a room that was slowly filling with water, while a timer on the wall counted down from 10 minutes. There were various tools scattered around the room, and what appeared to be a complex mechanical puzzle that would presumably stop the water if solved correctly. Objective. The protocol announced, escape the chamber of rising doom before you drown. Jake looked at the water, which was now up to his ankles, then at the mechanical puzzle, which looked like it had been designed by someone who thought Rubik's cubes were too simple. Rising doom, he said. Really? Who comes up with these names? He waded over to the puzzle and examined it carefully. It was definitely complicated, with multiple moving parts and symbols that suggested a specific sequence was required. The water was now up to his knees. Or, Jake said, I could just do this. He picked up a wrench from the tool collection and began dismantling the puzzle entirely. Within 2 minutes, he'd removed enough components to reveal the water shut-off valve that had been hidden inside the mechanism. Objective complete, the protocol said, sounding like it was developing a migraine. Time elapsed. 4 minutes 31 seconds. You know, Jake said, shutting off the water, I'm starting to think this place might be overthinking things. The fifth and sixth challenges passed in similar fashion. Jake solved the combat simulator by accidentally discovering that the holographic enemies were vulnerable to feedback from his communicator. He completed the endurance trial by realizing that the impossible. Physical challenges were designed for alien physiology and were actually pretty manageable for someone who'd grown up in Earth's gravity. Total time elapsed. The protocol announced as Jake approached the final challenge, 6 minutes and 15 seconds. Not bad, Jake said. What's the big finish? The final chamber was the most impressive yet. It was enormous, with walls that stretched up into darkness and a floor that looked like it was made from polished obsidian. In the center of the room stood a massive wall of energy that pulsed with colors that didn't exist in normal space. The walls stretched from floor to ceiling and completely blocked the path to the exit. Behold, the protocol said, the barrier of absolute finality. Catchy name, Jake said. Let me guess, I have to find a way through it. The barrier of absolute finality represents the ultimate test of warrior spirit. It cannot be climbed, cannot be bypassed, and cannot be destroyed. Only through perfect understanding of tactical principles, combined with supreme physical conditioning and unshakable mental fortitude, can a warrior hope to overcome this final challenge. Jake walked up to the wall and examined it carefully. It was definitely impressive, crackling with energy that made his hair stand on end. He could see scorch marks on the floor, where previous cadets had apparently tried various approaches to getting through it. So, Jake said, this is supposed to be impossible? The barrier of absolute finality has stood inviolate for over 3 centuries. Only the greatest warriors in galactic history have successfully. It's a hologram, Jake interrupted. I beg your pardon. It's a hologram. Look, you can see the projector arrays in the ceiling, and the energy readings are all wrong for a real barrier. Plus, the name is way too dramatic. When something's really impossible, you don't have to keep insisting it's impossible. Jake reached out and touched the wall. His hand passed right through it. The barrier is a psychological test, he continued, stepping through the hologram. It's meant to see if cadets will keep trying to solve an impossible problem, or if they'll have the courage to test their assumptions. The simulation froze. Alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Each objective complete, the protocol said, its voice now carrying a note of what could only be described as existential crisis. Total time elapsed, 7 minutes and 23 seconds. Jake looked around the final chamber, which was now flickering between different configurations as the simulation tried to figure out what had gone wrong. Wait, he said, 7 minutes. That's got to be some kind of record, right? The simulation gave up entirely. The walls dissolved, the floor disappeared, and Jake found himself standing in what was clearly a maintenance area, surrounded by very expensive-looking equipment that was now sparking and smoking. Oh, Jake said. The emergency beacon in his pocket began beeping frantically. Through the sparks and smoke, he could see technicians running toward his position with expressions that suggested they were either going to give him a medal or a court-martial. Emergency beacon activated, the protocol announced, its voice now coming from speakers that were clearly struggling to function. Simulation terminated. Please remain calm while technical difficulties are resolved. Jake looked at the destruction around him and sighed. I probably should have mentioned that I'm not great with high-tech equipment. The first thing Jake noticed when the emergency doors opened was the silence. The second thing he noticed was the crowd of alien faces staring at him with expressions that ranged from shock to disbelief to what appeared to be religious awe. The third thing he noticed was Commander Vex'tal, whose forearms were now moving in patterns that suggested he was either conducting an invisible orchestra or having some kind of nervous breakdown. 7 minutes, Vex'tal said, his voice barely above a whisper. 7 minutes and 23 seconds. Is that good? Jake asked, stepping carefully around a piece of equipment that was still smoking. Because I feel like I might have broken something. Broken something? One of the technicians, a blobbarian who was slightly more solid than Creorix, was staring at a tablet with the kind of expression usually reserved for financial disasters. Cadet Morrison, you've caused 2.3 million credits in damage to the Tartarus system. Oops, Jake said. In my defense, I did try to warn you that I'm not great with high-tech stuff. How? Vex'tal demanded, his forearms now gesturing wildly. How did you complete Tartarus in 7 minutes? The record was 28 minutes, set by a warrior who died from the effort. You finished in less time than it takes most cadets to read the initial briefing. Jake looked around at the assembled crowd of instructors and cadets. Everyone was staring at him like he'd just announced his intention to juggle black holes. In the back of the crowd, he could see Creorix, who had achieved a state of transparency that suggested he was trying to phase out of existence entirely. Well, Jake said, I guess I just approached it differently. Differently how? Vex'tal's voice was climbing toward frequencies that were probably illegal in several star systems. I didn't overthink it, Jake explained. I mean, the first challenge was just an obstacle course, right? So I used a grappling hook instead of trying to jump around like a space monkey. The second one was a puzzle, so I tried random combinations until something worked. The third one was supposed to be psychologically disturbing. But honestly, it was less stressful than my last performance review. Random combinations? The technician's voice was getting higher. Cadet Morrison, the puzzle of infinite complexity is based on advanced mathematical principles. It should be impossible to solve by random chance. Maybe it's not as complex as you think, Jake suggested. I mean, I just arranged the crystals in the shape of the Big Dipper. And it worked. The Big Dipper. Vex'tal's voice had now reached a pitch that was making nearby equipment vibrate. What is a Big Dipper? It's a constellation. You know, a pattern of stars that looks like a ladle. We use it for navigation back home. The silence that followed was so complete that Jake could hear the distant hum of the asteroid's artificial gravity generators. Finally, one of the instructors, an elderly Centaurian with enough medals to stock a small military museum, spoke up. You solved the puzzle of infinite complexity using primitive stellar navigation. I guess? I mean, it worked, and the barrier of absolute finality. Oh, that was definitely a hologram. I mean, come on, absolute finality. That's like naming your ship totally unsinkable or your password unbreakable 123. When you have to insist something is impossible, it's probably not. Vex'tal had gone completely silent. His forearms had stopped moving, and he was staring at Jake with the kind of expression that suggested his entire worldview was undergoing rapid reconstruction. Commander? Jake said. Are you okay? You look like you're having some kind of system error. System error. Vex'tal repeated slowly. Yes, I believe I am having a system error. Look, Jake said. I know I broke your simulation, and I'm sorry about that. But honestly, I think the real problem is that you're making this stuff way more complicated than it needs to be. I mean, why build an elaborate obstacle course when you can just use a grappling hook? Why create an impossible puzzle when you can just try different combinations? Why make a fake barrier when you could just make a real one? Because, Vex'tal said, his voice now carrying a note of something that might have been wonder, no one in the history of this academy has ever thought to question the fundamental assumptions of the challenges. Really? That seems like military strategy 101. Question everything, test your assumptions, and always look for the simple solution. We don't teach military strategy 101, one of the instructors said. We start with advanced tactical theory and work up from there. That, Jake said, might be part of your problem. In the back of the crowd, Kirix had finally achieved complete invisibility, leaving only his eyes floating in mid-air like a particularly anxious constellation. Cadet Morrison, Vex'tal said slowly, I believe we need to have a very long conversation about your species' approach to military training. Sure, Jake said. But first, can someone explain why that wall is still sparking? Because I'm pretty sure that's not supposed to happen. The wall in question chose that moment to emit a shower of sparks that spelled out system failure in what appeared to be 17 different languages. Oh good, Jake said. At least it's multilingual. 3 hours later, Jake found himself in what the Academy generously called the conference room of serious discussions, which looked like it had been designed by someone who thought intimidation was a valid teaching method. The walls were lined with holographic displays showing famous military victories, and the table was made from what appeared to be a single piece of crystallized starfire. Seated around this impressive piece of furniture were the Academy's senior staff, all of whom were looking at Jake like he was a particularly interesting specimen that might explode at any moment. At the final damage assessment, Commander Vex'tal announced, consulting a tablet with 2 of his 4 hands while the other 2 seemed to be having a nervous breakdown, is 2.3 million credits to the Tartarus system, 400,000 credits to the monitoring equipment, and 600,000 credits to the structural integrity of Training Bay 7. I feel like I should point out that I didn't actually break the wall, Jake said. It broke itself when I walked through it. Because you weren't supposed to walk through it, Vex'tal replied. You were supposed to spend hours trying to overcome an impossible challenge, thereby proving your dedication to military excellence. But it wasn't impossible. It was just a hologram that had convinced thousands of cadets over 3 centuries that it was real. Then maybe those cadets needed better training in reality assessment. The silence that followed was so profound that Jake could hear the asteroid's rotation. Finally, Admiral Corvus, the Academy's commandant, and a Krillian whose chitinous shell bore the scars of 100 battles, spoke. Cadet Morrison, she said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. In 300 years of operation, this academy has trained some of the galaxy's greatest military minds. We have graduated generals who've conquered star systems, admirals who've commanded fleets of 10,000 ships, and tacticians whose strategies are still studied across the galaxy. That's very impressive, Jake said. None of them, Corvus continued, have ever completed Tartarus in under 10 minutes. Well, to be fair, I had some advantages, such as… Jake thought about it. I grew up on a planet where everything is trying to kill you. I spent my formative years dealing with customer service complaints. And I have 3 younger sisters who've prepared me for psychological warfare that makes your simulation look like a relaxing vacation. And this gives you military expertise. It gives me perspective. Look, I'm not saying I'm better than your graduates. I'm saying I'm different. You've been training people to think like warriors, but I think like a human. Explain. Jake leaned back in his chair, which was probably worth more than his family's house. Okay, take the first challenge. You built an elaborate obstacle course because you wanted to test physical prowess and tactical thinking. But why make it elaborate? The goal was to get from point A to point B. I did that. Mission accomplished. But you didn't demonstrate the physical and tactical skills the challenge was designed to test. I demonstrated the most important tactical skill there is, achieving your objective with minimum risk and maximum efficiency. Why climb a mountain when you can take a helicopter? Admiral Corvus leaned forward, her compound eyes reflecting the room's lighting in ways that suggested she was processing information at speeds that would make a computer jealous. Continue. The logic puzzle was supposed to test advanced reasoning, but it was still just a puzzle. Puzzles have solutions, and the fastest way to find a solution is to try things until something works. The psychological challenge was designed to break down mental barriers. But I don't have the mental barriers you were trying to break down. Why not? Endos. Because I'm from Earth. Your simulation was designed to horrify aliens who've evolved on nice, safe planets where the scariest thing they encounter is a tax audit. I'm from a planet where the wildlife holds grudges and the weather patterns are personally offended by the concept of predictability. And the final challenge? Jake shrugged. It was obviously fake. I see. I mean, come on, if you really had a barrier that could stop anything, would you use it for training exercises? You'd use it to protect your most valuable assets. The fact that it was in a training room meant it was either not real or not important. That, said Admiral Corvus slowly, is actually a very sound logical analysis. Thanks. I think. However, you still caused 3.3 million credits in damage. Right about that. I think your equipment might be a little too sensitive. I mean, I barely touched anything. If your training systems can't handle one reasonably motivated human, maybe the problem isn't with the human. Commander Vex'tal's hands were now officially in full panic mode, fluttering around his tablet like confused butterflies. Reasonably motivated. You treated our most advanced combat simulation like it was a casual jog through a park. Because that's essentially what it was, Jake replied. Look, I get that you want to test people, but you're testing for the wrong things. You're looking for people who can overcome artificial challenges using prescribed methods. But real combat isn't like that. Real combat is messy and unpredictable, and usually involves someone trying to kill you with something you didn't expect. And you have experience with real combat? Admiral Corvus asked, though her tone suggested she suspected she already knew the answer. I have experience with Earth. Do you know what the most dangerous predator on my planet is? I assume you're going to say humans. No, mosquitoes. They kill more humans than any other animal, and they're basically flying syringes the size of rice grains. You want to talk about psychological warfare? Try going camping knowing that something smaller than your fingernail might give you a disease that'll kill you in a week. And that's just Tuesday on Earth. The room fell silent again, except for the soft whimpering sounds coming from Commander Vex'tal's direction. Or, Jake continued, warming to his theme, consider the Australian drop bear. Actually, scratch that. Drop bears are a myth we tell tourists to mess with them. The real nightmare is the Australian funnel web spider, which is aggressive enough to chase you and venomous enough to kill you in 15 minutes. Oh, and it can swim. Can swim? Squeaked Dr. Halux, the Academy's chief medical officer, and hold its breath for hours. But honestly, the spiders aren't even the top 10 scariest things on Earth. That honor goes to things like hurricanes, which are essentially atmospheric tantrums that can level cities, and geese, which are just concentrated malice with wings. Geese? Admiral Corvus repeated. Trust me on this one. An angry goose is scarier than most of your galactic predators because it doesn't know when to quit. A Retharian death serpent will at least have the courtesy to kill you quickly. A goose will chase you for 3 miles just to prove a point. So your position, Admiral Corvus said carefully, is that growing up on a planet of nightmarish death machines has prepared you for military service. My position is that growing up on Earth has taught me that the universe doesn't care about your feelings, your plans, or your sophisticated training programs. It's going to throw weird, unexpected problems at you, and your job is to solve them with whatever you have available. Sometimes that means following protocol. Sometimes it means walking through walls that aren't actually there. Admiral Corvus stood, her impressive height making the already intimidating room feel even more imposing. Cadet Morrison, in my 2 centuries of military service, I have never encountered a recruit quite like you. Is that good or bad? I'm still deciding. However, I have a proposition for you. Jake perked up. I'm listening. The Academy has several advanced training programs designed for exceptional cadets. Typically, these programs are reserved for those who show outstanding performance in traditional assessments. You have shown outstanding performance in completely destroying traditional assessments. Again, is that good or bad? It's interesting. I'm going to assign you to advanced tactical studies under Colonel Morrison. No relation, I assume? Not unless he's from Nebraska and really good at fixing tractors. Unlikely. Colonel Morrison is a Centaurian with expertise in unconventional warfare. You'll also be enrolled in xenobiology defense protocols, since you seem to have an unusual familiarity with dangerous wildlife. Sounds reasonable. And, Admiral Corvus continued, her mandibles clicking in what Jake was learning to recognize as amusement, you'll be helping us redesign the Tartarus simulation. Jake blinked. Come again? If a single human can walk through our most advanced training program like it's a children's playground, then clearly our training program needs improvement. You're going to help us make it better. Better how? More human. More unpredictable. More, she paused, searching for the right word. More insane? Suggested Commander Vex'tal weakly. I was going to say more realistic, Admiral Corvus replied. But your assessment may be more accurate. Jake grinned. When do I start? Tomorrow. But first you're going to write a detailed report on exactly how you completed Tartarus, including your thought processes and decision-making criteria. I want to understand how a Deathworlder thinks. That's going to be a short report. Why? Why? Most of the time I wasn't really thinking. I was just doing what seemed obvious. Admiral Corvus's compound eyes seemed to gleam with something that might have been anticipation. Cadet Morrison, I have a feeling that your definition of obvious is going to revolutionize military training. Or get us all killed, muttered Commander Vex'tal. Probably both. Jake agreed cheerfully, but it'll be interesting either way. As the meeting broke up and the senior staff filed out, Jake couldn't help but notice that several of them were giving him a wide berth, as if he might spontaneously combust or do something equally unpredictable, which, he reflected, was probably fair. After all, he was only getting started. Tomorrow, he'd begin the process of teaching the galaxy's premier military academy how to think like a human. He just hoped they were ready for it. Outside the conference room windows, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, completely unaware that their orderly universe was about to become significantly more chaotic. Somewhere in those stars, enemies of the Galactic Alliance were making plans, secure in their knowledge of how Alliance forces thought and fought. They were about to learn a very important lesson about assumptions. And Jake Morrison, former customer service representative from Nebraska, was going to be their teacher. The universe, as usual, didn't care about anyone's feelings on the matter.